Today we have David Law, Principal with LAWatWORK and the Honorary Solicitor for Commissionaires Canada. COVID-19 poses safety, productivity, legal, and moral dilemmas for people and organizations. How do we get things done in this strange time? Will we emerge in a stronger or weaker position? If you have any questions for David today during the session, you can type them in the chat window in the bottom right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar interface. Lisa, who is on the video stream right now as well, will be monitoring those and we'll be calling up the questions during the session. So with that, I will turn it over to you, David.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you for making this happen today. And thanks to everybody who's listening in or watching in this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're situated. So I'm a lawyer and I'm an employment and labor lawyer. I do a great deal of occupational safety work in my practice at LAWatWORK and also, of course, for Commissionaires. And so the question that we're all facing, not just my clients, not just Commissionaires, but everyone listening to this, every company and government office, organization in the country, question of how do we get back to something like normal? How can we be productive in this very weird time? And we have in this seminar, which I think is an excellent idea, 15 whole minutes, now about maybe 14. Not a lot of time to talk about this, and so what we do in this moment is we focus on really one thing that's universal, one thing that applies to employers and to employees in every province, in every city across the country, not just in Canada. What's the key productivity tool? How can we get back to something that feels like normal at work and, for that matter, elsewhere? And unfortunately for our audience, the answer is something that they're tired of hearing about. The answer is something they're tired of living with, and I can appreciate that because we're all trying to live with it. The answer is safety. The answer is health and safety and safe practice, Mark. Every employer in the country has a duty to protect the people who work for it, whether they're working in the office, away from the office, on the road, at home, arguably, a duty to protect them against dangers that arise because of work, to take reasonable precautions. And every individual listening who's an employee has a duty to herself, themselves, their coworkers, to take the same kinds of measures to protect themselves and their coworkers. And as I said, those measures are pretty familiar. But the reason that we have to dwell on them again today, and maybe in a little different way than people have so far, is because this is how we keep people well. This is how we keep people productive, or get them back to being productive and get them back to work. And also how we keep them alive. And the truth is that, and I think everybody, when they hear this, will know it's true, no one can really be productive or be their best possible self at work if they're afraid for their health, or they're afraid to take something home to somebody else and make them sick. We have to dwell on this, maybe in a little different way, in our few minutes.
So let me kick off some discussion points.
Yeah, okay.
And you and I have had some ongoing conversations. We're seated about 7 feet apart from one another, which is kind of the way of the world these days. We both have masks in front of us because we wear them around. But as you know, I walk to and from work a lot of the time, and it's a roughly 25-minute walk. And I've noticed a change from even June 15th to today, where even on, prior to June 15th, and especially on June 15th, when I first started returning to the office, people gave each other a wide berth in the sidewalk.
Yeah.
That seems to have gone away. People are, you kind of get the look in the eye. It's kind of like, I'm only going to walk past you for a fraction of a second, so it's okay if I'm within 3 feet of you because I don't want to step out on the road.
Right.
And I understand the risk associated with stepping on the road, but people are not going to opposite sides of the sidewalk to do as much as possible.
That's true.
So that's the sidewalk. That's to and from the office. Then there's within the office space where we're doing everything we possibly can, but it's not always possible or even practical to keep 6 feet distance. We all do our absolute best. what liabilities, if any, exist for an employer in creating a space where people can have enough sufficient space that they can keep wide? And what are the dangers of, I know there's a compound question, but you're good at handling these things. What is the complexity of the situation where somebody like myself, I'm walking to and from work and I'm doing the absolute best I can, but I come to the office and I trust that everybody else between my home and the office is doing the same.
Right. So the three principal ways of dealing with this issue haven't changed since the beginning, right? Check your own health. Do you feel well? Did you feel well today before you came in?
I did.
To this lovely room with this beautiful painting. Me too, happily. So I don't feel sick, and so I don't have any sense that I'm a risk to anybody. But are we actually consciously every day still doing that, asking ourselves the question? I suspect not. Are we keeping the requisite distance all the time? You just described a situation we all know about where people aren't keeping the requisite distance from strangers, not from people they know. And where we can't keep a distance, are we taking measures, personal protective equipment type measures, screens? Are we using those things ourselves as individuals or as organizations to protect ourselves and others? We know that we're not, right? We know that we're not there. And the odd thing is, we've all heard about this all day, everywhere for months, and yet still we aren't getting it. And the reason is, this is one of those things in life that is simple, Mark, but hard. Almost everybody who's listening right now probably has driven a car. A lot of them aren't driving these days because they're working from home, many of them, not everybody. When you get in your car and you drive it, you know what to do. You don't even think about doing it. It's a set of physical actions. You've learned it, and you do it. And most of you apparently are doing it well because you're all alive and you're listening to us talk and you're looking at us right now. So congratulations on it. But do you remember when you started? You remember the first time that you put your hands on that wheel and what it felt like? Can you remember, or do you have a kid that's recently been through it, or does your kid want to do it and you're terrified to let them? It's because it's simple ultimately, but incredibly hard to acquire a simple set of skills. And that has proven to be true with respect to these three principal measures. And that's why we're talking about it in the context of employers. Employers have a duty under law to take reasonable measures. And that means, and this is what, if there's one magic bullet in our talk right now, it's simple. Employers have got to take steps to train people to do this, as ridiculous as that might think. They might think that sounds. To remind them to do it, to reward them for doing it, to poke them from a safe distance when they don't. Because it's hard. So the distancing thing, that's an excellent example. And I think that what you may have seen, and I know you've raised this question with me before, is, what about if we all have masks on, right? I mean, isn't that the issue? If we all have masks on, what does that make us think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's skip the distancing. So you and I could put our masks. We didn't rehearse this, folks, but you and I could put our masks on right now. This is going to be an improvement on the show too. We're going to put our masks on, and now look, here we are. Look, is this okay with you? Here we are. And are you all doing this right now? I'm not going to get any closer to you. Okay, Mark, you're safe.
Okay, excellent.
So why don't we just do that? Why don't we just wear masks and we can all hang around each other's desks like we did before? And why isn't it okay? And I'll go back to that car that people learned to drive as an example. You've probably driven on the edge of a hill or a mountain at some time in your life, maybe along the edge of a cliff. I have. It's memorable. When you do it, there are things that you do to stay on the road and not go over the cliff. What's the first thing you do? You stay between the lines, right? You stay away from the edge. That's what you do. What you don't do is not pay attention to the edge of the road and keep banging into the guardrail on the side, because that's going to make you safe. Because that's not a good strategy to be safe on the edge of a mountain. That's what we're doing right now. You and I are staying within the lines on the road right now because we're 6 feet apart. We measured it, actually. And we're not relying on the guardrail to keep us alive, to keep us from going over the brink. So the measures that employers have got to institute as best they can are distancing. And that, of course, includes people working remotely. And that has had radical, revolutionary effects already on our society, and we're not done seeing those revolutionary effects. I think we're all learning to live with them. But even in workplaces, we have to create ways of maximizing distancing. Some of them are crazy. I've driven the wrong way down the grocery store aisle myself a few times because I don't look, because I didn't learn to shop like that. This is simple, but it's hard. And the way that you learn a thing that is simple and hard, like a bike or a car or wearing a mask or keeping your distance, is you keep doing it and you try to acquire the habits over time. On my way here, and I am not making this up, on my way here today to do this webinar, guess what I left on my kitchen table?
Your mask.
My mask. And I had to go back in the house and get it.
It's almost like leaving your phone behind now. It's
Yeah.
like, where am I without this?
Well, it ought to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we need to connect them. Somebody will come up with that.
Yeah.
This is what, and employers are going to hear this and go, this is ridiculous. But this is no more ridiculous than any other thing that you think is common sense that is a safety rule. A hard hat, the boots, protective glasses in the right places, hygiene in the workplace. We've always had that. We just have more of it now. Some of these things may all seem like common sense to us, but common sense is the thing that people often, if they have it, they forget to use it because they're kind of distracted, and including doing their jobs. So employers, this is the best advice I can give you in the few minutes that we've had today together. I don't even know how many minutes we have left.
Well, we're down to about 3 minutes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that point is drawn clear.
Yeah.
Because that'll protect people. It will also protect employers, and the liabilities that you refer to, workers' comp injuries and illnesses, or personal illness and injury, disability claims, time away from work because you're sick, etc. Or God forbid, someone becomes very ill or makes a loved one ill, all because they came to work. And I've spent my whole career in this area, and I keep asking people, just do these simple things so that you can leave work alive and go home to the people who love you. And by the way, you better do them for my kid too, because she's in the workforce now. And I'm talking to this audience today about this to say the same thing. And it's boring, too bad. It's really important. And it's also the way to obey the law right now in the best way possible to keep people safe.
So I have another question, but
Yes,
I want
sir.
to throw to Lisa and make sure that we get audience questions taken care of. We are about 2.5 minutes left in the scheduled time, and then we have an optional 5 minutes to play with. So
If people need it,
I suggest that just in terms of, if we have lots of questions, we should trim the answers.
Well, if we do, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So Lisa, do we have any questions from the audience?
We have one question at the moment from Greg. Is there any discussion at a legislative level to adopt liability protections for business?
Business, if you're talking about worker injury cases and employers wanting to be protected from liability, they already have that liability insurance, and it's called workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is actually insurance for employers, so that if anyone who comes to work gets sick at work, they're automatically insured. So every employer in the country that has workers' comp, which is most because they're required to in most places, they already have liability insurance. This is a bit of a myth, actually, that they don't. Workers' comp has been the best liability insurance employers ever had. They just don't like it because it can be quite costly.
So if there's a follow-up to that question or any others, please get them in. So I'm going to throw another question to you really quickly, David, and I'm not sure how quick an answer you can give on this, but we have a situation where people are starting to return to work.
Yeah, sure.
maybe not everybody wants to return to work.
Right.
Some people have the luxury maybe of being able to work from home, and maybe an employer who's willing to allow them to do so.
But many do not.
Many do not. You know, in our case, for example, our security guards are very necessary. They do essential work in the field.
Yes,
You can't do that from your home.
that's right.
But in my job, for example, I'm very fortunate because I could do it from home, and I could do it from a coffee shop if I really wanted to. What kind of policies and issues should employers be aware of in the event that an employee is, you know what, the government has said we can return to work, but I'm still not comfortable. Maybe I have a spouse who's immune compromised from a past condition. Maybe I'm just not comfortable that maybe everybody's taking all the necessary precautions. I'd rather just play it safe in my own little bubble at home.
Sure.
What kinds of things should employers know in terms of handling a situation like that?
Almost every employee in the country has some right to refuse work that is unusually dangerous. Many will exercise that right, and employers have to respect it and go through a process of examining their complaint, their concern, and addressing it. Is it valid or not? Should we do something different or not? That's not wrong. It's actually the right thing to do, and employers should obey the law and honor the work refusal. However, if an individual is mistaken, and ultimately the Ministry of Labor rules that the situation is not a risk that they can refuse, then they're going to be expected to report for work. And if they're needed at work, they'll be replaced if they don't. And that's an inevitable outcome. And that's not callous with respect to their health. The bottom line is, what are the objective facts about the risk? And that's what the individual should assess for herself, and the employer should assess, and if necessary, a Ministry of Labor official.
Sure. Thank you very much. So we're at 12:47. We'll throw to Lisa one more time to see if there's any questions from the audience before we wrap up.
We have one more question. The question is from Vincent. It is, what were the 3 principles?
The 3 things that people need to learn right now, Vincent? Well, they're pretty simple, the 3 principles. Number 1, people have to learn the habit of assessing their own health. Employers may want to take steps to help them with that. You may want, in some circumstances, to institute a temperature check when someone comes in, for example. But getting people to assess their own health and then asking them the question, if they're reporting for the business to work on site, the daily questionnaire. Did you take your temperature today, Mark? How is it?
Am I supposed to
No,
answer the question?
I'm looking at Mark.
Okay,
Yeah. How is it? Oh, it's my usual 93 degrees Fahrenheit, David. Oh, that's very
We
interesting.
still operate in Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I do. Well, I like Fahrenheit. It's a better scale. So I can switch, so I'm ambidextrous. The second principle for Vincent and others is the notion of distance. The virus travels a certain distance. We have learned a lot in the last few months, and we know that these globules fly out there and then they fall. They don't seem to survive all that long on surfaces, but they do last in the air and they do move in the air. That's what distance is about between us right now. Distance is complicated. It's not everybody just standing around 6 feet apart. It's also figuring out how to work with each other in distances and how to meet with each other in distances. And it's not easy. It's hard to learn. The third principle is protective measures. That could be the plastic screens you see when you go everywhere now, at every cache. You could have those between workstations. You can have them in hallways. And of course, it's also personal protective equipment where distancing isn't available. It's the guardrails and the lines on the road. The distance is what you keep from the edge of the cliff. The guardrail is the thing that you hope stops you from going over. Those are the 3 principles we're talking about here. Self-assessment, distance, protective measures where necessary. These are all laid out, by the way, usefully on a website that we're going to show people right at the end. Ontario Ministry of Labor has put specific guidelines for different types of industries up on their website. They're very straightforward, no magic, I'm afraid nothing new, but they're there for you. And they are the official guidance, which means that you're expected to follow them if you're following the law.
Thank you very much for your time today, David. Thank you very much for your time joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you in September. Have a safe summer.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.